Hello and welcome to Theology on Tap, and I want to thank you for tuning in because I know that the things that I talk about, it is difficult for a lot of people. So a lot of times in the past, people have called me the devil or the heretic, and Christians really love to throw those words around. And there's one person in particular accused me of working for the devil. And the biggest problem that he has with me, one of the big problems that he has with me is that I do not respect the law, God's law. Well, it's not that I don't respect the law. I know that Bible says that the law in itself is good, but when we are involved with God's perfection, which is the law, then we're going to screw up, right? So that the law was not given to us as a blessing. It was given to us to be the curse so that we could find another way of going to God, to find ourselves righteous before God, and that is through Jesus Christ. But Galatians says this, all right? It says, for those who rely on the works of the law are still under the curse. You're under the curse. For it, as it is written, cursed is everyone who does not practice everything which is written in the book. As Jesus said, if you have broken the least of the law, you have broken them all. So we don't go by the law, we go by faith. Because the law does not bring about faith. The law does not bring about love, joy, peace, kindness, and goodness. Because if you practice the law, you are under the curse because no one can obey the rules and the regulations. No man is justified by the law, right? The law is not made by faith, it says. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for our sake. All right, so if you continue to stand by the law, then you're cursed. And the curse you could clearly see because people become judgmental. And this is the problem that I have a lot of times with Christians. And we tend to really curse those, since we are cursed by the law. We stand firm against certain sins, but yet not other sins. So the person who is accusing me of working for the devil because I don't go by the law, I don't curse people with the law, I go to people with the gospel, Jesus and crucified, and the faith, God's faith, Jesus' faith. I hope that he or she were to plug into that, and then we'll see what happens. I can't tell people what is right and wrong. All right, I could only point that person to Jesus Christ and allow the Spirit of God to do his work. Allow God to express himself. This is what Gene Scott used to say all the time. Allow Jesus to express himself through you, right? The Spirit of God to speak through you or to work through you. We'll see what that means. So when it comes to homosexuality, to abortion, to adultery, things like that, people will do those things, right? Because murder and to all these different, wrongful things in the world, people know it. All religions condemn things that are not good for mankind. But just because you know the law doesn't mean you're going to obey it, right? Because Christians murder, Christians commit adultery, Christians have sex before marriage, right? So what is the difference? So what most Christians end up doing basically is not follow the law, but they say, well, the law tells us we're all sinners, but you have to go to Jesus to be forgiven. So it doesn't matter how much wrong you have done in your life because the least of the law, you have broken them all. So at the end of the day, the only difference is, as this person would say, I have faith in Jesus Christ, therefore I'm okay. So all the wrongs I have done, it's okay, but I have the right to judge you who do not have faith in Jesus Christ of all that is wrong. So if I tell him I don't judge people by the law, I go by the law of mercy. Right? As he says in Galatians, as in book of James, I go by law of mercy. I go by the love of Christ. So it doesn't go with judgment because of what Christ has done. So then their first question that people ask, well, if you don't go by what is right and wrong, then can I, as a person, commit adultery? I mean, I don't know why adultery is such a big issue. They always say that I could cheat on my wife. I could have sex before marriage. And I used to usually say things like, do whatever you want. But then people get really offended by that. So instead of saying, do whatever you want, just say, well, just even if I were to tell you, no, God says, by the law, do not commit adultery. Is that going to stop people from committing adultery? It doesn't work. I think the best way to do it, to allow people to continue to live a life that is worthy of God's name, is to allow that person to make a connection with God and let that person decide upon himself or herself what is the best thing to do. So if you stand against homosexuality, then don't be a homosexual. If you stand against climate change, then ride a bike. If you see my other videos, I know I stand against the fact that I don't consider people sinners because the law become obsolete because of what Jesus Christ has done. So a lot of people will say, God hates homosexuality, God hates abortion. And you see that there are protests that's been done against these kind of sins, certain sins, but not every sin. Because I don't understand that if you look at homosexuality, if you look at the statistics of it, about 1% of people in their teenage times consider themselves homosexuals. When you're in your 20s and 30s, 2% does. But when you get to be like older, like my age, way less than 1% consider themselves homosexuals, which is kind of strange because if you were born as a homosexual, why is it changes as the age group changes? Doesn't make that much sense to me. But let's just say, for the sake of the argument 1.5, 1.7% of our population are homosexuals. And Christians are just so anti this, right? We protest against it. We preach against it. There are ministries that goes against it and try to convert people in a way of, well, we'll help you to become heterosexuals. Some people swear by it. It works, but majority of people say it didn't work. They were living a lie, as they say. All right. So you could say, if you go by the law, I could understand why they would do something like that, right? Because you have to stand for what is right. You have to condemn sin. Well, but then Bible does say, don't judge other people. If you're going to condemn sin in your own life. I think that's what Galatians would say. But here's the question. The person who was accusing me of being the devil and whatnot, well, he's divorced. Well, what does the Bible say about divorce? I don't know what church's stand is on divorce because they don't make a lot of noise. But if you're a Christian, you go to your church, there are ministries that does pre-marriage counseling. And then there's marriage counseling. There's teenage counseling for sex, marriage counseling, and everything. Because we are doing our best because the Bible does talk about the importance of marriage. So Christians do their best, right? Because we know divorce is wrong. But what's the percentage of Christians that get divorced? Quite a bit, right? Look at the statistics in America. I think in 2017 or so, something like 8 out of 1,000 are getting married that year. 8 out of 1,000. But 3 out of 1,000 are getting divorced. So what's that percentage? I don't know. It's maybe 40%, 40-some percent. So it's a little less than 50%. But that is everyone. Right? So when it comes to first-time divorce, they say something like 25%, 22 to 25% of people get divorced. So majority of the people that get married do not get divorced, but 25 or 27% do. That's quite a lot of people, isn't it? I would think there's a lot more than 1.something% that become homosexuals, or if you're then born that way, who are homosexuals. So there was a sermon that I heard that says something like, 40-some% of people in this country get divorced, but those who are devout to Jesus Christ, the one that goes to church and everything, only about 20% are getting divorced. 20%, that's still quite a bit. Well, what does the Bible say about divorce? It says, if you divorce a person and marries another, you have committed adultery. That's what he says. Paul actually says, if you get divorced, don't ever get remarried. Stay single. That's what he says. All right? Okay, of course, if your spouse dies, then you're free to get married again. But if you're married and you get divorced, Bible says, don't get remarried. I don't know why. Because I know in statistics, people who get divorced, who get married again, the likelihood of that person getting divorced again goes up by 50% or so. And then that person, another 50% if you get divorced and get married again. So the percentage of divorce goes quite a bit higher every time you get remarried. Maybe that is the case. I don't know, but the Bible is very clear. It says if you get divorced and marry another, you have committed adultery against your first wife because she's still alive. Paul says if you're divorced, stay single. Do we follow that? Do we follow that? So what do we do? So if Christians are really, really serious about obeying God's law and following what God said, or Jesus said, what the Bible says basically, is that instead of going to, abortion clinics and having signs up there and going to pride parade and putting up Bible verses and stuff, we should go to divorce courts. Right? You should go to divorce courts with a sign that says God hates divorce. But nobody does that. Nobody does. In fact, church are very good about divorce. In fact, when you go to majority of big churches, they actually have ministry for people who are divorced. Do they tell them not to get remarried? I don't think so, because I know there are people who accuse me of working for the devil, who has been married, got divorced, went to a ministry that does the divorce ministry, how to deal with the pain and then move on with your life, and get remarried. And church encourages that. They do. Or at least that church that this person went to, because he's remarried, which is great for me. I think it's great. I think he's much happier now than before. God bless him and everything. But if you go by the law, that kind of ministry should not be in the church. In fact, the ministry should be, because I can't judge all churches. I haven't been to all churches, but I would hope that most churches that have ministry for divorcees is to help them to stay single. Because if you get remarried, you have committed adultery against your first wife. So how do Christians really deal with that? So that's my question for the day. All right, it's for Christians. How do you or your church deal with people who get divorced? Do you encourage that person to get remarried? Which I think the regular society, majority of people would say, yeah, find love, because love is awesome, it's great. Or do you say, no, you stay single for the rest of your life? I don't know what the advice would be, because it's adultery. Adultery is a big one, right? It's a big sin. People used to kill people that have committed adultery in the past, right? Because it's ugly. It's so terrible. And yet we continue to encourage people to get remarried. So how would you deal with that? How do Christians decide what sin to fight and protest against, and what sins do they allow to continue to encourage, in fact, even more? Right? This is the problem about the law. If you go by the law, you stand cursed. I say go by Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Because in that, there's no judgment. There's just love. And just preach the gospel, Jesus and crucified, what it means, and allow that person to make connection with God and allow the Spirit to lead and guide that person's life. That's all we could hope for. And which is a great hope. Really, really is. If the Spirit of God, Jesus, is the Spirit of God that raised Jesus from the dead, is dwelling in that person, and a person makes a connection with that power of the Spirit, there will be resurrection in life. But if you go by the law, you stand cursed, right? Because you can't keep the law. And we become judgmental. And we get to choose what sin is greater than the other sin. Even though Jesus said, least of the law, you have broken all of the law. That's why a lot of Christians cry when they go to revival meetings. They stand cursed. But if you stand with the Spirit of Jesus Christ, you're free. That's what Galatians says. Read it. All right. God bless you. And if you still go by the law, please tell me. What do you do with divorce? Does your church encourage remarriage? Knowing the fact that you're committing adultery? But if you are married and got divorced and you marry another, you commit adultery once against your former spouse, or is it you're always committing adultery because you're staying married with the new spouse? How does that work? You see? Now you could have a long debate, hours and hours of debate, why it's allowed now, why certain sins are not allowed anymore. You could go on and on and on. See, that's a curse in itself. So there's disagreements. Churches would split. Right? Another denomination will be formed. It's a curse. Go by the Spirit. Go by Jesus and Him crucified. All things will work out for good. Have faith. Have faith. God bless you. I hope that makes sense. All right. And please let me know about where you stand on divorce. Do you agree that if you get remarried, you're committing adultery, that you should stay single? What does your church do? Encourage remarriage, or do they discourage it? Right? But as for me, I could understand why somebody who is a very good Christian, he believes he's a great Christian, accusing me of working for the devil. All right, thank God I don't believe in that kind of devil. But he says I'm working for the devil. So what does he think of himself? It can't be good. He stands accursed, I guess. From my perspective, I hope that person becomes free in Jesus Christ, free from the curse. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.